and spoke to his disciples. So the message is not being broadcast to the crowd in general. In this particular point, the emphasis is that he is looking at his disciples. Now the others can hear it, but this is specifically, the message is toward them about how that he wants them to live and the things that he would have them to do. Now in Luke, well, let's just talk about this. This could be the same sermon that Matthew spent 3 chapters on, or it might not be. We don't really know. Jesus could have given this same message multiple times in many places. But we know that what is mentioned all sounds very much in line with what is in Matthew. But Matthew, he wrote his gospel to the Jews. He mentions a lot of things about Jewish law. And then you've heard it said, but I'm raising the bar and it's above that. You've heard it said. I mean, he touches on all kinds of things. He talks about adultery. He talks about lots of different things that are in the law, and then emphasizes that his message is way beyond that and well beyond that. This doesn't mention those things. We really only have, it's about a third the length of the Sermon on the Mount. Some scholars call this the Sermon on the Plain, and compared to the Sermon on the Mount, and it's because it says Jesus came down and he stood on a level place. Probably wasn't a plain, but it was, at least he came down the mountain and probably got level with the folks or something like that. But regardless of whether it's different or whether it's the same and just written different, what's important is the message, that's in here for us. And we're going to read it. Since it's not 3 chapters, if I could get a few people to read, the first one would be 20 through 36, and the next one would be 37 through 49, if somebody's willing to read that.
Then he lifted up his eyes toward his disciples and said, "Blessed are you poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you shall be filled. Blessed are you who weep now, for you shall laugh. Blessed are you when men hate you, and when they exclude you, and revile you, and cast out your name as evil, for the Son of Man's sake. Rejoice in that day, and leap for joy, for indeed your reward is great in heaven. For in like manner their fathers did to the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall hunger. Woe to you who laugh now, for you shall mourn and weep. Woe to you when all men speak well of you, for so did their fathers to the false prophets. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who spitefully use you. To him who strikes you on the one cheek, offer the other also. And from him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who asks of you, and from him who takes away your goods, do not ask them back. And just as you want men to do to you, you also do to them likewise. For if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what credit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you hope to receive back, what credit is that to you? For even sinners lend to sinners and receive as much back. But love your enemies, do good, and lend, hoping for nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be the sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the unthankful and the evil. Therefore be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful."
Okay, thank you. Catherine, I think, had volunteered to read. You mind doing 37 through 49?
49? Okay.
Yes,
Do
ma'am.
not judge, and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. A good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, will be poured into your lap. With the measure you use, it will be measured to you. He also told them this parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A student is not above his teacher, but everyone who is fully trained will be like his teacher. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, Brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when you yourself fail to see the plank in your own eye? You hypocrite, first take the plank out of your eye, then you will see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eye. No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes or grapes from briars. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For out of the overflow of his heart his mouth speaks. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? I will show you what he is like who comes to me and hears my words and puts them into practice. He is like a man building a house who dug down deep and laid the foundation on rock. When the flood came, the torrent struck that house but could not shake it, because it was well built. But the one who hears my words and does not put them into practice is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. The moment the torrent struck the house, it collapsed and its destruction was complete.
Thank you. I know those were long reads. I appreciate that. Mark, will you go ahead and go to the next slide? Nope, one after that. Sorry, got them in the wrong order. The Sermon on the Mount, or this particular sermon in itself, that could be a whole quarter of study in itself. We could have a whole quarter lesson series just on these items. But obviously we don't have that kind of time to spend on it, and maybe we will someday. But a lot of folks have taken and kind of compared Matthew, compared Luke, what's in, what's out, and like I said, it's really about the message that's here. And looking in the Bible, a lot of the headings are in there. It breaks it up into 4 or 5 different topics. I've really kind of just broken it into 2. And that's the 2 sections that we just read. The first section explains the reward for faithful disciples. It references a craving for him and his will versus feelings of self-sufficiency. Right out of the starting gate, he launches into the rewards, the blessings. Blessed are you. He doesn't dance around the fact that his disciples will have challenges and enemies. Some may be poor and hungry due to following him. This may have been talking about physical hunger already in some of those things, just economic. But we know that in talking to his disciples, he said, some of you may be hungry. Some of you may be poor. I recognize those things are coming as a result of following me, but here's the rewards. Some may have enemies because of him and you following me. But then he goes and he says, and when enemies seek to harm disciples, the disciples must not seek to harm them back. Not only are you going to have challenges, this is the mindset I want you to have regarding that. In other words, the disciples of Jesus can endure the world's rejection because they already have God's acceptance. So he's reassuring them here. The second section, which is 20 through 36. No, it's not. It's 36 through 49. Got a typo up there. Maybe it'd be better, Mark, if this thing didn't work. But 36 through 49, I didn't get that changed. He's warning about temptations to judge, condemn, or fail to forgive enemies. See, he's saying that his disciples should show his character as the sons of the Most High, love, grace, and generosity even to enemies. You know, there's a paragraph that I took from some of my study, and it said, and it just summarizes the whole thing, and I'll just read it to you. In summary, the main message of the sermon is that Jesus' disciples will mercifully love and not accuse or attack their enemies. They get their strength from such dramatic behavior not from a sense of self-esteem or personal worthiness, but from a deep trust in the Father's merciful approval and blessing through the Lord Jesus Christ. It is not enough just to hear his words, but we must do them. So I put a few bullets up there. First section, Jesus over self-sufficiency. Blessings for followers, woes to the self-righteous. Be merciful as the Father is merciful. The second section, warnings not to judge, condemn, or withhold forgiveness. True followers will be evident based on their fruit. He talks about you can tell a tree by its fruit. And unbelievers will be punished because their house is not built on the rock. So very concise, you know, the lessons we can learn. You know, but you know, Jesus, as he's telling these disciples, and so I think when he went to pray the night before, and he knew he was going to name those 12, he also knew the message that he was going to be delivering to his disciples and believers that would follow him. And he knew that he was going to be healing people and power was going to be drawn from him and all those things, but he prayed all night. So think about us. We pray all night. When it comes day, we're ready to go, right? Oh no. We would say, I am exhausted. I am going to bed. It's not what Jesus did. He prepared himself in prayer, strengthened himself, and hit it the next morning with what he knew that he needed to do. And I'm not suggesting we don't need to sleep. I'm just saying that's different, right? Praying all night and then doing what he did, you know, the very next day in the morning. Any questions or comments about that? Any thoughts on whether they're one and the same? And Matthew was writing it to the Jews, and so he wrote it a different way versus, Luke wasn't there. I mean, he was an eyewitness, or he wasn't an eyewitness. He was asking people all of these questions and various things, and he had a more concise way of writing it, and it was to a different audience. But really not sure if Jesus only gave this sermon one time. I mean, he was going various places. Go ahead, Lynn.
I think it's interesting whether you draw parallels between what happens in Matthew and what happens in Luke, and we see a lot of the same themes in the lessons. We live in an age where people feel like it is incumbent upon everybody else to validate their decisions and their particular lifestyle. And I think it's interesting in this teaching of Jesus, he never once, he says, love your enemies. If people curse you, pray for those that spitefully use you. And we see that kind of thing go on all the time where people, if you don't validate how I choose to live my life, then you're a bigot or you hate me. And we simply don't hate them. We respond with love, and it doesn't mean that we acquiesce to that kind of pressure from people who say, in order to prove that you love me, you have to accept the way I've chosen to live my life. Jesus never talks about any of that in here. He says not to judge people, and he says watch that you don't judge someone and you've got a big plank in your own eye. He only says how we're supposed to treat people. He never varies away from that theme about how Christians are to interact with other people. And we have seen recently, where Christianity was mocked, and people asked me, they said, what's your response to that when Christianity is mocked? And I said, we turn the other cheek. I go, if If Islam or any of the other world religions had been mocked in a way that Christianity was recently mocked, there would be blood in the streets. There would be a fatwa or a jihad going on right now. But we're Christians. If people abuse us, if they treat us spitefully, if they try to take advantage of us, Jesus tells us exactly how we're supposed to respond to that. But never once does he say that you validate their bad behavior. Never says that.
Thank you, Lynn. And I'm aligned right with you, I think, because my next set of notes is I wanted to have a discussion on chapter 6, verse 37, or maybe not a discussion, at least a mention about it, and that is the verse about judging. I'll go ahead and read it again. Judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Possibly one of the most misused verses in society today. People even use it flippantly. Don't judge me. We use it flippantly. Maybe not, but others use it to the point where it's, they think anything that is different, like what was Lynn was saying, is being hypocritical, or we're being condemning, or we're being self-righteous. But God did not condemn true discernment. What he condemned was the actions of where somebody is judging you for doing things that I won't do myself, and they're both right. And the true discernment is not what this is about.
Everett, I'd like to kind of piggyback what you're talking about and really go back to even verse 20. And even comparing it to the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew, where he talks about blessed are those that are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God, in the King James, where in Matthew it says kingdom of heaven.
Yeah.
And if you think in the context of what Christ is preaching here, what are all these blessings? They're kind of setting the standard for the new covenant, right?
Yep.
All right, so we're thinking of it from that standpoint. Well, then you think of it from the standpoint of the Jews at the time. They're God's chosen people. They have the covenant. So obviously they have a set standard that they're accompanied, that they're used to. And so when he says, judge not, it's like, what? The sun is rising in the west for them. It's so dramatically different from what they're accustomed to that it's a complete change in a lot of their mindset. So from that perspective, it makes a little more sense. If you look at it from that, the lesson for us is there also.
Yeah, we've seen that in some past weeks. Like, they're not fasting, eating with sinners. They fasted multiple times a week, well beyond what was even expected, and in various things. So, yeah, their world has been challenged, and without a doubt.
So, Everett, if you look at Romans chapter 2, verse 1, it says, you therefore have no excuse, you who have passed judgment on someone else, for at whatever point you judge the other, you're condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things.
Yeah.
So that goes right along with what we read just a few minutes ago in Luke 6.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, and I think we can learn some things too about, we shouldn't be expected to be forgiven if we're not willing to forgive. And some of those, that by the things by which you measure, you should be measured. Okay, we've talked about the centurion and the servant, centurion servant being healed. We talked a couple of weeks ago, whenever we see that Jesus didn't just limit his healing. to Jews, and actually the centurion made an appeal to him, and Jesus said, "I've not found such great faith, not even in Israel." When he said that, he wasn't even worthy to have him come to his house if he would just be aware of it and speak it, and all of those things. So we covered that fairly well. We're going to move into chapter 7, verses 11 through 17. And we're going to look at a miracle that is, this particular miracle is specific to Luke's gospel. It's not in any of the others. Jesus has gone to Nain. It's a community about 25 miles southwest of Capernaum, near Nazareth. Y'all remember what happened at Nazareth? They wanted to go push him off the cliff and all. So he's down in that area again, not too far from there. And so I'll just kind of summarize and then read some of the specific scriptures that I want to emphasize some points. A widow had just lost her only son, and it describes him as a young man. So what happened in those days, first century there, whenever, and actually even in Old Testament times, doesn't have a husband, just lost her son, which pretty much indicates that it's going to put her in a challenging socioeconomic position. She's going to be reliant on others. So she's really doubly vulnerable here, I would say. The setting is the crowds were following Jesus, and they're coming in, and coming out the gate is a funeral procession for this young son. Those days they didn't embalm the body. Let's go visit the family, have things 2 or 3 days. They were going to get the bodies buried quickly before they started breaking down. So this lady, she is weeping, very, very sorrowful. The Greek word is, just wailing. And as Jesus comes, he recognizes her. And he suggests to her that he said, "Stop crying." He reached out and he touched the coffin, or some versions use bier, B-I-E-R. I think that's actually the stand that, where'd Lynn go? The stand that the coffin sits on, or in those days it might have been something that they just carried the body on, if they didn't have a coffin. And he reached out and touched it. And so once again, just like we saw him reach out and touch the leper, a few weeks back, Jesus has just shown that he's impervious to being considered unclean. He's not, that's not something that he's worried about. But I think the thing that I want to emphasize most, and Mark, go to the next slide, or back one, whichever one it was, right there. I told Don I practiced this word about 7 or 8 times today, and I'm probably not going to get it right, but it's splachnizomai, or zomai. All right, is that close, Scout? You don't know? Okay, good. I'm safe then. Is that close, Woody? Close enough. Okay. Well, and so that word is related to compassion. Jesus felt compassion for her as he's walking. He stops the proceedings. He says, "Stop crying." And then he raises the young man, he speaks the young man back into life. But the reason I wanted us to look at this word is the root word for it, which is the first several letters there, splachna, is intestines. So essentially what they're describing here is that this was gut-wrenching for Jesus as he saw it, to the point where he says, I can and I will do something about this. He knew the lady's plight, raised her son. It said he spoke. We don't know what he spoke. But then Jesus gave the son back to his mother. That word, that Greek word for compassion, that gut-wrenching compassion, is used 3 times. It's used here, it's used in the Good Samaritan, and it's used in the Father when he saw his son coming back. So 3 times. So that is the kind of compassion that Jesus had. And so I know y'all know what that feels like. There's just times gut wrenching is the term I use. For it. Lynn, go ahead.
So one of the things that I hope we take away from this particular story and this miracle is go back to verse 12, when a dead man was being carried out, the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Okay, if this is her only son, and she's already a widow, in that day and that time, her life is pretty much over.
Yeah.
She now has nothing, and doesn't and will not have access to anything. So Jesus has a very visceral response. He knows, without anybody saying, "Hey, that's her only son, and she's a widow." He knows this. Mm-hmm. He knows that. So his response is very visceral, because he was raised in that culture, and he understands the situation she's about to start living in.
Thank you. So what we also see from this now is the crowds are getting larger. He's got a crowd following him, and now this crowd has seen this miracle performed. It's another set of folks. So Jesus continues to do his work, continues to get recognized. Some of the scholars say, that he's talking about, Luke's mentioning, he's preparing us for, Jesus heading to Jerusalem, later on. And we talk about that in the next few chapters. But gut-wrenching compassion. That's the kind of thing, I've had that maybe a few times in my life. I think Donna could probably tell you a couple of those where I just looked at the ceiling all night. Didn't sleep. Is there anything else that can be done? It just eats on you and eats on you and eats on you. And I think we're out of time. A funny story I'll end this with. And I don't want to take away from the seriousness of this situation, but my sister, she has told me that she's had the same dream twice, years ago, several years apart. And she said she was in the casket, and she sat up and looked around and said, I just wanted to see who all would come. That's not what this was, right? But when I read that today, I thought, wow, Jesus just set him up. And so what did the young man say? I know it wasn't, I just wanted to see who would come, but it just the fact that actually happens, that actually happened, and that he did that. He raised more than one person from the dead, but the compassion for this woman, was the driver for this. It wasn't a Lazarus situation or any of that. It was just, he recognized nobody said a word, and he just put everyone in awe. And so we'll just stop there. Next week, we're going to talk about John the Baptist, and it's a very interesting discussion in that, how does John the Baptist, who saw Jesus get baptized and all of these, have doubts and need his doubts, affirmed in various things. So that's where we'll start next week. Thank y'all. Hope my sister doesn't watch the YouTube. I'll be dead.
Let me ask you a question.
Yes, sir.
This is kind of the way my mind runs.
Yeah.
Is the longest prayer we ever hear here. If it's 10 minutes, it's a long time. And this says that Jesus prayed